Fellow Ghanaians, good evening. Tomorrow, 30th June 2020, the Electoral Commission will begin the process of compiling a new register of voters, which the Commission will use for the 7th December 2020 presidential and parliamentary elections. The compilation of a voters' register is one of the most important tasks in the effective functioning of any democracy, because if an eligible citizen's name is not on the register, that citizen cannot exercise the right to vote and cannot therefore participate in the determination of the choice of the government of the day. It is thus vitally important that all eligible voters register, so on the designated day of 7th December, they can vote to choose the President of the nation and the Member of Parliament of their area. In effect, our vote, our thumb, is the expression of our individual sovereign power as a citizen, which we should cherish and guard at all times. Our country, Ghana, is regularly cited as the shining example of the place in Africa where the electoral process works and where it is always being improved upon. We have had 7 consecutive presidential and parliamentary elections, which has given us 5 presidents in the 27-year history of the Fourth Republic, with peaceful transfers of power from a governing to an opposition party on 3 separate occasions. It is a record virtually without parallel on the African continent, which we should all treasure. All of these did not threaten the foundations of the state. And even when there was disagreement with the result of an election, it was the Supreme Court, rather than the streets, that determined its outcome. From tomorrow, in 33,367 polling stations across the country, we embark on yet another journey to deepen further our nation's democratic credentials, as the exercise to compile a new voters' register to be used for the December 7 general elections commences. The hurdle which stood in the way of the new voters' register was surmounted last Thursday, 25th June, when a 7-member panel of the Supreme Court, presided over by the Chief Justice, in a unanimous decision, settled all the issues surrounding the voters' register. The decision affirmed the right of the Electoral Commission to proceed with the compilation of a new register in accordance with the provisions of Constitutional Instrument CI 126. It reiterated the widely held belief that a credible electoral register, and indeed a credible election, are important ingredients to securing the future well-being of any democratic nation. I am proud to be a citizen of a nation whose independent institutions, like the judiciary and the Electoral Commission, continue to operate without fear or favor, ill will or malice, and without regard to the political, religious, or ethnic affiliations of any citizen or group of citizens. There are some who have argued, and continue to argue, that in the midst of a pandemic, the compilation of a new register, and indeed the conduct of the parliamentary and presidential elections, should be put on hold and scheduled for a later date, perhaps when the pandemic ends. That is not possible. The Constitution of our Republic makes no provision for the extension of the mandate of the President, who wields executive power, beyond 4 years. To exercise executive power in the Ghanaian state, you must be duly elected by the Ghanaian people. You must have their freely expressed consent. On 7th January 2021, when my mandate as the current president expires, a duly elected person must be ready to be sworn in as President of the Republic. There is no other way. And in order to forestall any needless constitutional controversy, which could throw our nation into jeopardy, we must vote on 7th December 2020. The same applies to Parliament. We should not fear or be alarmed. Despite the COVID pandemic, elections are being properly conducted in many nations across the globe. In Asia, we've witnessed the conduct of a successful election of South Korea in April, at the height of the pandemic in that country. In Europe last week, we have seen those of Poland. And in our own continent of Africa, both Mali and Malawi have preceded us in organizing successful national elections. Surely, it is not beyond Ghana to join these nations in organizing a successful general election, even in the midst of the pandemic. Fellow Ghanaians, we have chosen to govern our country according to the tenets of multi-party democracy and the principles of democratic accountability. And we dare not trade them off, more so during times of crisis. To guarantee the safety of all eligible Ghanaians at the 33,377 polling stations across the country, the Electoral Commission has put in place the necessary elaborate protocols as outlined earlier in the day by the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, Jean Mensah. All these protocols should be adhered to strictly. Additionally, I want to remind all Ghanaians that all the other protocols and restrictions, especially those dealing with large gatherings, must be adhered to and enforced at the polling stations at all times. So let us all abide by them and conduct ourselves in a manner befitting the image and status of Ghana. So I urge all eligible Ghanaians, I repeat, all eligible citizens, that is, Ghanaians of 18 years of age or above, and of sound mind, no matter what party they belong to, if any, to go out and register so that they can exercise their civic responsibilities on 7th December to elect a government of their choice in a free, fair, peaceful, and transparent election. Using your God-given and constitutional rights costs nothing, but staying home can come at a very steep price. The pandemic notwithstanding, we have to strengthen Ghanaian democracy. It must be our collective duty to ensure that we have a register that is fit for purpose in December, and we must all make sure that persons who do not meet the requirements as set out clearly in the Constitution do not find their names into the register. If you aid the registration of an ineligible person and you are caught, you will face the full rigors of the law. The election on 7th December must be a Ghanaian election, not a West African election, conducted with a register of Ghanaian voters. That is the only way the true will of the Ghanaian people can manifest. It is crucial that both the registration exercise along our borders is another dimension of this process of guaranteeing the peace of the nation. Fellow Ghanaians, it is no secret that our neighbor to the north, Burkina Faso, has in recent times been at the receiving end of a number of terrorist attacks, as has another neighbor, Côte d'Ivoire. To shore up our borders against such attacks and to defend our nation's territorial integrity, the armed forces, at least since I came into office, have been very proactive in engaging in operations to secure our borders and foil any potential terror attacks on our soil. Operations such as Conquered Fist and Kwandungu have been going along for some time, since 21st February 2019, to meet this objective. Deployments of soldiers in areas along our borders have been regular, and residents living in border towns will bear testimony to this. Again, in the fight against COVID-19, I took the decision on Saturday, the 21st of March, to close all our borders by land, air, and sea. To ensure substantial compliance with this directive and to assist personnel of the Immigration Service, our eastern, western, and northern borders were shored up by some personnel from the military. This development, for example, during the period of the 3-week lockdown of Accra, Temakaswa, and Kumasi, led to the arrest of some 5,000 persons along our borders who had entered our country illegally. Indeed, the first 6 recorded cases of COVID-19 in the Volta region, for example, were those of West African nationals who entered the country illegally. In total, 207 soldiers have been deployed along the borders of the Upper East region, 110 soldiers in the northern region, 102 in the Northeast region, 98 in the Volta region, 72 in the Oti region, 69 in the Upper West region, 64 in Bruno region, 21 in Savannah region, and 14 in the Western region. Let me state, without any form of equivocation, that these deployments are not in any way intended to prevent Ghanaians from registering to vote in December. They are there for their express purpose, which is to guard our borders. That is the limit of their remit, and they will not be permitted to stay beyond that remit. I'm fully aware, like the military commanders, of the sensitivity of their deployments at this position in our history. And I'm confident that that sensitivity will be fully respected. I have no interest in disenfranchising any eligible Ghanaian from registering in tomorrow's exercise, nor am I interested in any improper machinations to win any election. I've spent my life fighting for free democratic institutions in our country, and I'll continue in that fight for the rest of my life. The idea of being a president who emerges from a rigged election is abhorrent to every fiber of my being. I want to continue to be the president of a Ghanaian people who have given me their free consent with the blessing of the Almighty. So please, once again, if you are 18 years of age and above and are of sound mind, from tomorrow or the appointed time, go to your polling station and register. If you do not register now, you cannot vote in December. Present your Ghana passport or card, which are the only 2 forms of valid identification. In the absence of any of these valid IDs, an applicant can submit one completed identification guarantee form endorsed by 2 registered voters to be registered and issued with a voter ID card. By these procedures, all eligible voters will be registered. No disenfranchisement of voters is contemplated by them. Together, and adhering to the safety protocols at the polling stations, let us demonstrate that even during a pandemic, we in Ghana continue to be a beacon of democracy on the continent. Our democracy requires not a unity of ideas or political allegiances, but a unity of commitment to the Ghana project, the free, democratic, open, prosperous, and united nation, respectful of human rights and the rule of law, that animated our forefathers to make the sacrifices for the liberation of our nation from foreign rule, that has bequeathed to us our beloved Ghana. May God bless us all in our homeland Ghana and make her great and strong. I thank you for your attention and have a good night.
Just gone by, President Akufo-Addo with a national address ahead of the voter registration, which begins tomorrow. Like I said, my colleague Evan Spencer will be joining me and Winston Amwa as well. So we have a little bit of analysis on this. But just to give you a summary, if you're just joining us, the president talks about the voters registration that's going to start tomorrow. He begins with a reminder of the need to register. So that's the first time he talks about the need to register, that you will be able to select who becomes president, who becomes your MP. But then he talks about, he gives a historical background, talking about the 7 presidential and parliamentary elections that we have had, and 3 separate transfer of power, which has been smooth, he says. And then he urges you to go and use your God-given and constitutional right. And he's talking about eligible people going out there. He warns that if you support anybody who is ineligible to vote, the law will not be very easy on you. And then he talks about something that has dominated discussions over the weekend up until now, terrorist attacks. He talks about security at the borders, which is something we'll be talking about. He goes on then to talk about the pandemic, voting or registering within the pandemic. Let me go over Zoom. Evans Spencer is joining me. Hi, Evans. Evans, you're muted. Unmute for me.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, you'll be the first to start my unmuting classes. I hear you now. Evans, it's good to have you. Winston, are you there? Okay, Winston will join me later. Evans, first of all, and I know you follow the president, I was trying to go through the summary, but hopefully I was able to capture it. How, for you, important is such an address at this time?
Very important. It was absolutely critical. We are, I must say, at a very important crossroads between the 2020 elections on December 7th and the voters register. And I must actually argue that the compilation of voters register will probably be more contentious than the 2017 elections, all because of what has happened in the lead up to it. I'm talking about the registration exercise and all that has happened today, hours before the registration began. It was absolutely critical that as the commander-in-chief of the Ghana Armed Forces and the president of the Republic, that he addresses the country and attempts to allay fears. The big question tonight is whether or not he has succeeded in allaying the fears of those who believe that something sinister is at play in the way the Electoral Commission has handled the processes leading to the voter registration exercise, and also the contentious subject of the deployment of the military along our borders. That is, for me, the biggest unknown. We have to wait to see how people react to this. But to the question of whether this was important, it was absolutely critical, as important as his first address to the nation following our COVID-19 outbreak locally.
So let's take a look at the content. We've talked about, you know, the whole idea of this presentation, but then looking at the content, the president talks about the need to register so that you're able to exercise your, what he calls your God-given constitutional right. And then he goes on to talk about the terrorist attacks. He links it to this conversation that's been raging on social media since the weekend up until now, talking about the number of troops we have stationed across. And then I find interesting, Evans, also a number of repetitions, if you like, that essentially reminds people to go out and vote, to register, because if you don't do that, you cannot vote in December, in the December elections. What do you make of the content so far? We can begin with the security deployment.
Now, he comes to the point of talking about the security deployment after he had addressed something that had been linked to it, which is the fact that only eligible Ghanaians should register and the right to vote. Before that, he makes the point that this is not a West African election.
Yeah.
It is not a West African registration. It is a Ghanaian registration. He makes that point before he comes to address the question about the military deployment. Mm-hmm. And I think that chronology is important.
Okay.
The president is trying to emphasize to us, and it's constitutionally so, that you have to be a Ghanaian and of sound mind to vote, which means that you have to be a Ghanaian to register. Now, the key question is, I guess the debate is not about whether or not only Ghanaians should register. I think everybody agrees only Ghanaians should register. I think the debate has revolved around, how do you ensure that only Ghanaians register? Is it by deploying military men along the...
Okay. Yeah, it looks like Evans froze up on me, but we'll certainly raise him back. Let's fix that delay in the transmission. But Evans was talking about a chronology which he finds very important, where the president talks about the fact that this is not a West African election or a registration, but a Ghanaian one. Evans, continue from where you left off.
Yes. You can hear me all right?
I do.
Okay, great. I was just making a point that what the president stated about the elections are, well, the registration and the elections are only open to the Ghanaian, and that it's not a West African election, and it's not a West African registration to vote. He was only stating facts as has been enshrined in our laws. Mm-hmm. My point is, that isn't really what the controversy is about. The controversy is not about whether or not our registration to vote and the voting itself is open to foreigners or Ghanaians. I think everybody agrees that the registration and elections are only open to Ghanaians. Mm-hmm. The controversy has been about, how do you make sure that only Ghanaians actually get to register to vote? That was the controversy. Is it by deploying military men and security forces to the borders, so you prevent West African neighbors who aren't Ghanaians coming into Ghana to vote? That's one of the key questions. Or is it about limiting the identification documents you require to get onto the voters' registration exercise to those documents you can trust only Ghanaians can take possession of? And that question has been a question that has dogged us for years. It was a key question in the Abu Ramadan case. It's been a key question in the last three Supreme Court cases that have gone to the court, the three cases that the Supreme Court and the High Court have now categorically decided on. And the last point about the deployment of the military, which again, the president had said, and again, it's important to know the president's point, that the deployment was so, and this is something that he had maintained, and he's a commander-in-chief, the backstop was him. He says fundamentally was deployed because of COVID-19. But then he makes the point when he talks about deployment that their duty is also to ensure that the borders are protected. Now, it is the timing is important. Now, clearly from what he said tonight, even if you believe what the defense minister said today at the press briefing, that the deployment had been done since March, the president said tonight, and if my recollection is accurate, that there has been a beefing up of the military men and the security along our borders, which means that we've seen an increased number. I guess that is where the suspicion is people say, well, why are you increasing the number hours to the registration? The president has addressed it. It is up to people, those with real stake and interest in the electoral process, the political parties, to believe him, but he's made his case.
All right. Well, Evans, I just wrap up. I need to wrap up because I've run out of time right now on this. But he ends by saying that he's aware of the sensitivities of this deployment. But then he says he has no interest in disenfranchising or anyone or engaging in any improper machinations to win elections. But this is certainly a position that the minority or the opposition NDC disagrees vehemently. They believe that there is a clear agenda, there is a plan to rig this election in favor of him.
Well, that again is the NDC's prerogative to assert that. And as we expect, the MPP and the president had denied that. The thing about what is happening now, and I was making a point to a colleague, a friend recently, that it's almost as if this is repeated itself. Anytime you're going into the election, the opposition party tends to level accusations against the incumbent government. The incumbent government denies it about potential rigging. It happened in 2016. The NPP, then in opposition, did the same, leveling all manner of accusations against the Electoral Commission led by Charlotte Osei and against John Dramani Mahama, that there was a rigging machinery in place and that the voter register then was bloated. Right. They even held a big press conference, and Baumia put out statistics to show that 70,000 odd people had, from Togo had come and voted illegally.
Yeah, Evans, I'll have to
won the elections.
Yeah, Evans, I'll have to unfortunately rudely interrupt you on there because I've run out of time. I need to make time for your show as well, PM Express, and I'm sure that you can extend the conversation there before you even put on your your what's on the bill. Evans, thank you so much for bringing us into your home, our fellow Ghanaian, this evening. Evans Mensah will be up at 9 p.m. with PM Express. He has a whole panel, 4 strong men who will be talking with him on PM Express. My name is Gifty and Apia. It's always a pleasure coming your way. Let's do this again tomorrow.